I want to take some time and talk about men who transition to women and the violence and pathology that they express towards women. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. It's been several years working in the criminal justice system with sex offenders, violent predators, and I still do to a certain extent, and also with victims of violence. I want to respond to this comment because I get a lot of comments about people who are angry and upset, and things like that about some of the things that I say and some of the things that I've seen in working with predators. And so I'm going to use SFD's comment here. I'm sorry. I'm confused about some of this video. Are you implying that trans women are seeking to be trans because of the power that women have? And also the Lorena Bobbitt. So I had spoken on the video about how Lorena Bobbitt had cut off John Bobbitt's penis because of infidelity, that was what had come out initially, and you're right, and thank you for correcting me on that. But there was also some allegations that she cut it off. She alleged that she cut it off because he was sexually assaulting her during their marriage. So thank you for correcting me on that. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this thing. So again, I've worked in California. I've worked in the prison system in California, so I can only speak about that. I can't speak about other states. And I worked with both state and federal. And at federal, I worked as a contractor. But anyhow, what I was going to say is, when in California, and I work specifically with sexually violent and violent predators. And in California, they allow people, when they get into the prison system, to transition. So they can transition by just saying what they want to be referred to in terms of their pronouns. They can also transition by taking the hormones, and then they can also transition and petition to have the full gender reassignment surgery, pending approval by a psychologist and their medical team, of course, psychologists, psychiatrists, and their medical team. So what I have noticed, specifically in working with violent predators, and I'm talking about men who are sadistic, men who hate women, and I'm talking about men who have committed serious crimes against women. There is often this hatred, and it's once you've seen it enough times, you can almost track it down to the crimes that you see that they're committing women. You almost track it and say, oh, I bet you in 1 to 2 years they're going to become a woman, because it all starts to manifest and pathologically look the same. And I'll tell you something else, because I want to be clear about this. I've only seen it in men who want to transition and who do ultimately end up transitioning to women. I have not seen this kind of pathology in women who transition to men. And so what I've noticed specifically in the pathology in men who transition to women or want to, is that there is this there's this pattern of abusiveness. There is this pattern of attention seeking, and there's this pattern of when it comes to violence and aggression, that violence can look like extreme sexual violence. It can come to beating women, and it's not just one woman. Typically, it is like a litany of women, and you can see the progression of violence, because most of these people, and not always, but most of these men, they tend to come to prison. They have repeated jail and prison contact. So these are men that are coming back for violence, and you see that history of violence. And not all these men are get caught in due time. So there's men out on the street that this happens to, because there's a lot of women that don't come forward, or there's a lot of women that do come forward, and then once they get into that, the whole melee of what they have to do in order to do this, they end up bowing out and dropping the charges because they don't want to go through it, or they've been intimidated. But anyhow, you can see that progression of violence. It's a sexual violence. It is predatory. It is ultimate control of women. It is misogynistic. But you can see it in terms of the extreme violence that I've seen. It's usually like dismemberment, but it's always where their crimes are centered towards women, always. And I'm not saying that this applies to all men that transition to women, but I am saying that I've worked with men who have pathology who then transition to women. Some of my most violent people that I've seen towards women, and they know that they're not going to get out of prison because of the amount of violence that they've had towards women. No, it's try to stay with me. What was I going to say? I know what I was going to say. So I'm going to bring back our friend Gary Cole. And I talked about him. Gary Cole is an actor, one of my favorite actors. I loved him in Talladega Nights. But anyhow, he played in a movie an officer and a murderer. This is a soft representation of this. So in Gary Cole's movie, and I haven't seen it in many years, so I'm going based off of memory, very similar to how I was doing with Lorena Bobbitt. But in this movie, and I talked about how in a previous video, how there's an escalation in psychopathy, right? Many men, many people who commit crimes or who are predatory, they tend to escalate in the types of crimes that they're committing. Like there is a progression. So in Gary Cole, he was a peeping Tom. And again, it was centered mostly towards women, and he's a married man and all this other kind of stuff. He's a high-ranking officer in the military. He started out as a peeping Tom, then he was breaking and entering, and then he was, raping women, and then he escalated to murdering women. In that movie, again, a very soft representation of that is that he was taking items from the women that he was, offended against. He was wearing their clothes. So he began to start wearing their panties and lingerie and things like that under his officer's uniform. That is, I say that is a soft representation of that, because that's exactly what I see in violent offenders. Somebody else had commented, and I've forgotten about this one. And you guys are so great about reminding me of these stories, and I appreciate that. But there was an influencer, a black male influencer, a coach for women, by the way, that got into, similar trouble last year when one of the women that he dated came on here and said that he was predatory against her and was violent and had kidnapped her, I believe, for several days. She also produced camera footage of him wearing her clothes. And so that's an example of someone, again, that progression of violence. It starts out just like there's a progression of violence, there is a progression of transitioning, because these men are often enraged with what they're dealing with, which is that they covet what women have. I'm going to go ahead and say it. And that's exactly what it is. And they covet that, and they desire to transition into that. And they hate women who are able to freely roam around with all of this attractiveness, all of this energy, all of this power, just for being a woman. And so they try to take it away. They try to absorb that. They try to literally suck the life out of that, and ultimately end up transitioning into that. So that's exactly how I see that pathology play out in the criminal justice and in other ways too. And I definitely think there's some aspects of down low culture that plays into that. But yes, that they are envious of a woman's power, and they want that, and they covet that for themselves. And I'm going on record to say that. I'm not going to go back and forth in comments, because there are going to be people that are committed to misunderstanding what I'm saying and wanting to argue about it. I'm not going to argue about it. I'm also not going to allow disrespect. I'm happy to converse. I'm happy to educate, but it's not one of those things. I know what I've worked with. So hope that helps answer your question.